Hold the line, damn it, we're not turning back. Commander Roran Halvek's voice carried through the bridge of the vanguard like iron striking stone. His officers straightened instinctively, their eyes fixed on him as if the weight of his command alone could anchor them against what lay ahead. Outside, the stars drifted cold and unmoved, but the warships arrayed across the void told a different story. The Thrin homeworld was under siege, and humanity was stepping into a storm it had promised long ago. The bridge smelled faintly of recycled air, and metal panels warmed by too many bodies pressed into tense focus. The taste of strong coffee still lingered on Halvek's tongue, bitter and grounding. Every sound sharpened into clarity, the clipped reports of officers, the rustle of uniforms, the subtle creak of deck plates shifting under gravitic strain. Screens bathed the crew in shades of blue and red, data cascading down displays while tactical overlays marked the orbiting blockade. Ships of the Draxine hegemony loomed in disciplined formation, a cordon drawn tight around the world below. "Commander," said Lieutenant Derek, his fingers trembling slightly as he worked the targeting board. "Multiple patrols circling the orbital elevators. Energy signatures are constant. No breaks, no gaps. They've sealed the Thrin completely." Halvek's eyes narrowed. His jaw tightened until the muscles in his cheek ached. "Of course they did. That's how they crush weaker systems. Strangle them first, and when there's nothing left to breathe, they march in and plant the flag." He leaned closer to the display, noting how the enemy ships shifted like watchful predators. Aaron Vosk, the cyber warfare chief, cleared his throat. His manner was calm, his words chosen like a surgeon choosing instruments. "Their networks are noisy, too many signals bouncing between ships. They've centralized control, efficient but brittle if cut in the right place." His hands tapped the board, a rhythm that betrayed the excitement he suppressed. Halvek's gaze lingered on him. "We'll come to that soon enough. For now, eyes on the blockade. Record everything. The Council claims they didn't authorize us, so we'll need proof when they come asking why the galaxy shifted while they looked away." The younger officers exchanged uneasy glances. It was one thing to talk about honoring the Thrin debt in Academy halls. It was another to fly into the teeth of an empire that had crushed entire sectors without pause. Halvek read their expressions and felt the old burn of command settle into his bones. He could not show doubt. The men needed a figure carved in stone, not flesh. Darek broke the silence with a voice roughened by disbelief. "Commander, forgive me, but this is the Draxine. Their fleets are 10 times ours. Why us? Why now?" Halvek turned toward him slowly. He didn't raise his tone. He didn't need to. "Because 2 centuries ago, when humanity was still stumbling through the dark with radio static for company, the Thrin caught a chain of rocks heading for Earth. They warned us, even though it cost them resources they could barely spare. Billions of our people lived because of that signal. We don't forget debts. Not then. Not now." A hush swept the bridge. Even the constant reports of crewmen faltered. In that silence, each man felt the weight of memory made flesh in their commander's words. It was not about orders. It was not about politics. It was about obligation carried like a brand across generations. Vosk leaned forward, voice steady, eyes fixed on Halvek. "And if the Council condemns us for intervening, then history will judge them," Halvek answered. "But history will know where we stood." The tactical officer signaled sharply. "Commander, visual confirmation, Thrin transmissions. They're being broadcast on civilian channels. You'll want to see this." The screen shifted. Grainy footage filled the command deck. Thrin civilians crowded oxygen farms, their scaled bodies pressed against one another as overseer drones hovered above. Panic rippled across their features as Draxine patrols marched through, their armor glinting under artificial lights. One soldier raised a rifle and fired into the air. The sound echoed even through the filtered audio feed, a crack that seemed to pierce the human crew's bones. Men on the bridge flinched. One muttered a curse under his breath. Halvek stood unmoving, his hands clasped behind his back until the bones in his knuckles strained white. The broadcast shifted again. A Thrin elder was dragged into view, his crest dulled with age, his breathing ragged. A Draxine commander forced him onto his knees, then raised a blade toward his throat. The feeds stuttered with interference, but the meaning was unmistakable. Public execution. Live across the stars. Rage flared in Halvek's chest, but he kept his tone level, sharp as cold steel. Vosk, mark that channel. We're going to carve a message into every frequency they thought they owned. The cyber warfare officer's lips twitched in something close to a smile. Already working on it. The elder's voice rasped through the channel, distorted but still carrying the weight of dignity. We asked for nothing when we warned you. We only hoped that if one day... His words broke as the Draxine raised the blade higher. Halvek barked, Darek, deploy drones. Now the lieutenant's hands shot across the controls. Dozens of drone icons flickered to life on the screen, breaking away from hidden bays along the Vanguard's hull. They streaked toward the execution platform, their engines leaving thin trails of light in the darkness. Seconds stretched like hours. Crewmen clenched their fists, breaths shallow. The elder closed his eyes. The blade began to fall. Then the feed erupted in fire. Drones smashed into the Draxine guard posts, explosions blooming. Across the platform, static washed over the channel as the image dissolved into chaos. The elder was pulled from view by surviving Thrin as the platform collapsed in a blaze of sparks and flame. The bridge of the Vanguard erupted, not with cheers, but with a grim, silent determination. Men exhaled through clenched teeth, shoulders straightening, jaws set. They understood what had just been done. The line had been crossed. There was no going back. Halvek spoke into the stillness, his voice carrying the weight of command and history alike. Gentlemen, you have just witnessed the moment Earth honored its promise. From here on, every step is war. The words hit the crew like a hammer against an anvil. The smell of ozone from overloaded circuits mingled with the sweat of men who knew they had stepped into something larger than themselves. The taste of fear clung to their throats, but beneath it, another taste settled, sharper, harder, like steel. Vosk looked up from his console, his eyes catching Halvek's. We've just declared ourselves, Commander. The galaxy will come for us. Halvek's gaze held steady, his face lit by the glow of tactical readouts and the cold stars beyond. Then let them come. We're here because of a promise, and promises are stronger than fleets. The bridge fell quiet again, but this time the silence felt heavier, charged with the knowledge that every man aboard had just stepped onto a battlefield written into history. The stars outside remained unchanged, silent witnesses to a vow repaid in fire. Commander, their countermeasures are already shifting. Vosk's tone cut across the bridge with a cold edge that drew every man's focus. The execution platform still burned on the screens, but new patterns appeared. Draxine patrol ships moving with mechanical discipline, adjusting their blockade to close the gaps the drones had carved. Halvek stood unmoving, his eyes narrowing as if he were staring not only at the enemy fleet, but through it, seeing every step of the plan forming ahead. The air tasted dry and metallic, carrying the tang of recycled oxygen that clung to the throat. Men shifted in their chairs, uniforms sticking to damp skin. No one wanted to admit that they felt the first chill of fear racing down their spines. They've tightened formation, Darek muttered, scanning the tactical feed. Every elevator node now guarded by 3 cruisers, rotating patrols in overlapping arcs. They mean to choke the Thrin until they suffocate. They won't waste munitions on annihilation if they can harvest obedience later, Halvek said. This is doctrine. A blockade leaves survivors who will build their cages willingly. We break doctrine, and we break them. His words hung heavy, a steel blade drawn slowly from its sheath. The command deck shifted focus as Vosk pulled a set of feeds across the main laser plasma display. Here, he said, tapping rapidly. Look at the convoy lanes. Fuel barges still enter every 30 minutes. Escorts are minimal. They rely on predictable routes. If we cut the artery, their fleet starts bleeding. Halvek leaned closer. The faint glow from the screens painted his features in hard lines, shadows deepening across his jaw. You're suggesting strikes on their supply chain while they think we're caged near Thrin orbit. Vosk allowed the hint of a grin. Not suggestion, Commander. Opportunity. If we strike fuel first, Their warships will have to choose between holding the blockade and keeping their reactors alive. Derek looked uncertain. And what about reprisals? They'll retaliate against the Thryn population. Every time we strike, innocents pay. Silence followed, broken only by the muted tapping of control boards. Halvek turned to face him, his gaze steady, his voice firm. Darek, they're already paying. Starvation, suffocation, executions for the cameras. Every delay kills them more surely than any bombardment. Our duty is to shift that burden back onto the ones holding the leash. The young officer's throat worked as he swallowed, his eyes dropping to the screen once more. He nodded slowly. Then let's cut the leash. Halvek's hand came down flat against the console, the sound echoing like a hammer across the deck. Deploy the mining carriers. Mask their signatures against the gas giant's radiation belts. Keep them dark until they are in range. I want drones embedded in the convoy lanes within 2 hours. The order sent a ripple of activity through the crew. Officers bent over their stations, sweat beading along foreheads, fingers flying over control boards. On the outer screens, icons representing the disguised carriers peeled away from hiding, slipping into the shadow of the giant planet that loomed like a swollen bruise in the background. Vosk leaned closer, his voice a whisper meant for Halvek alone. When they see industrial tools used as weapons, they'll realize we turn every skill into war. That will unsettle them more than any battleship. Halvek didn't look at him, but a grim satisfaction settled into his expression. Good. Let them be unsettled. Hours bled forward, each minute stretching taut as the crew waited. The bridge smelled of stale sweat and recycled coolant, the recycled air biting dry in the lungs. Men's eyes darted between the glowing displays and the clock ticking down the intercept time. The only sound was the clatter of keys and the occasional barked update. Convoy approaching, Darek reported at last, his voice carrying a tremor he tried to suppress. 6 tankers, 2 escorts, standard formation. They're following the charted lane, unaware. Bring carriers into release position, Halvek ordered. Through the viewing ports, drones emerged silently from their hidden bays, their dark hulls catching the glint of distant starlight. They slipped across the void in disciplined waves, spreading wide, their movements like sharks closing on prey. On the main display, the Draxine convoy drew closer, icons blinking with automated status signals. Vosk murmured, "Now!" The drones accelerated. Explosions ripped through the lead escorts, bursts of fire streaking across the black as fuel lines ruptured and reactors imploded. Tankers veered wildly, some tearing apart under the shock. Alarms howled across the Draxine channels, their formation disintegrating in seconds. The crew of the Vanguard exhaled as one, a sound like storm winds breaking loose. Broadcast the footage, Halvek commanded. Every neutral relay station. Let the galaxy see their war machine bleeding from its own arrogance. Within minutes, streams of the ambush radiated outward. Neutral systems, merchants, and frontier stations received the images. Draxine convoys torn apart not by superior fleets, but by retooled drones. But the victory carried a shadow. Minutes later, a new broadcast cut across the Thryn system. The Draxine showed rows of Thryn prisoners lined against a wall, rifles raised. The first volley cracked through the feed, and bodies slumped, lifeless into dust. The crew of the Vanguard watched in silence, every man stiff, their knuckles whitening as fists clenched against consoles. "They're punishing us through them," Darek said, voice hollow. Halvek closed his eyes for a brief second, then opened them again, hard and cold. "Every move has a cost. We either pay it now, or the Thryn pay it forever. We end this blockade before it consumes them all," Vosk's jaw set. "Then the next strike won't be against convoys. It'll be against their patrol formations. We'll bleed their warships until they collapse from within." Halvek's reply came low, deliberate and final. "Then let's bleed them." The bridge sank into grim resolve. Men leaned back to their stations, the air sharp with tension, the taste of iron on every tongue. Outside, the Draxine fleet loomed unbroken, but inside the human vessel, the first spark of defiance had already become a fire that would not go out. "They've marked us," Halvek announced, his voice carrying across the bridge like the strike of a gavel. He stood before the laser plasma display as new enemy signals poured in, forming into arrowhead clusters around the Thrin orbit. The Vanguard's crew felt the gravity of that moment deep in their bones. The Draxine blockade was no longer routine enforcement. It had become a hunt, and Earth's fleet was the prey singled out for annihilation. On the feed, Draxine cruisers flared their drives, sliding into coordinated arcs, their movement crisp and methodical. Every rotation in their pattern narrowed the blockade tighter, every vector aimed toward the human vessels. A heavy silence filled the command deck, broken only by the occasional snap of boots against the floor as crew hurried between stations. The air was dry, almost metallic on the tongue, the taste of dust. Left by life support filters working under strain, Vosk bent over his console, eyes scanning streams of intercepted chatter. They're transmitting system-wide orders. Orbital strikes authorized on Thrin cities. They want to punish civilians to break our will. Derek slammed his fist against his armrest, the sound sharp enough to draw startled glances. They'll massacre entire districts to draw us out. We can't let that happen. Halvek turned slowly, his expression unyielding. We can't stop every strike. We don't have the numbers. What we can do is make them bleed every time they move against us. He pointed toward the clustered patrols circling the orbital elevators. We show them the price of cruelty. The young officer's jaw tightened, his breath shuddering as he forced himself to nod. Halvek's words did not soften the truth, but the honesty itself steadied him. On the outer screens, fire blossomed in the atmosphere below. The first orbital bombardments struck the edges of Thrin settlements. Flares of light stained the night side of the planet, the shock waves flashing up through cloud banks. The deck of the Vanguard seemed to tremble with the imagined echo of destruction. Men gritted their teeth, the taste of iron thickening as they bit the inside of their cheeks in helpless fury. Vosk's voice came again, level but hard. We have one advantage. Their doctrine demands showmanship. They're transmitting these strikes across open channels. That leaves their networks vulnerable to insertion. Halvek's gaze fixed on him. You can exploit it? The cyber warfare chief's lips twitched in the faintest hint of a smile. I can make them see what isn't there. I can feed their formation commands the wrong stars, the wrong gravities, the wrong velocities. If their fleets rely on centralized instructions, we can turn their own discipline into chaos. Halvek stepped closer, his boots echoing against the deck. The screens bathed his face in pale blue light. Then do it. And do it clean. I don't want improvisation costing us lives. Vosk nodded, fingers already darting across his controls. His screen filled with cascading data, the streams painting him in shifting hues. He murmured like a man speaking to the machine itself, coaxing it to betray its secrets. Commander, Derek said, voice low, you think they'll come for us directly now? Halvek's eyes never left the tightening blockade. They'll come. Vathar has no choice. We struck their convoys, we humiliated their soldiers, and we broadcast their weakness to the galaxy. To restore their fear, they'll come for me personally. His tone held no bravado, only the calm of a man stating the inevitable. As if to answer, a new transmission cut across every channel. The face of Admiral Vathar appeared, scales catching the glow of command lighting. His voice rumbled through the speakers, guttural and heavy with contempt. Humans, you crawl into wars that are not yours, and you bleed for insects who cannot save themselves. You think yourself defenders, but you are anomalies, and anomalies are corrected. I will see your vessels broken and your crews scattered into the void. The Thrin will watch your corpses burn before their cities are ash. The bridge stiffened. Even the youngest crewman felt the air turn colder at the directness of the threat. Vathar was not a faceless enemy now. He was a predator promising their deaths, and his certainty rang like iron. Halvek waited until the broadcast ended. His reply came not as a transmission, but as a command to his men. Record every word. Archive it. When we stand against him, the galaxy will hear the difference between tyranny and obligation. Volsk's console flared with red warnings. Commander, Draxine cruisers breaking formation. Fast acceleration. They're moving to close the noose, but their signals are already corrupted. They don't know they're accelerating into collision paths. On the main display, two enemy icons suddenly merged, the light blooming as ships slammed into each other with catastrophic force. The crew of the Vanguard gasped, the sound rising like a wave. Flames burst across the void, debris scattering into orbit. The Draxine formation buckled as other ships veered erratically, trying to compensate for the chaos tearing through their ranks. Halvex seized the moment. Target their escorts. Hit them while their discipline fractures. The Vanguard's batteries fired, joined by its escorts. Rail slugs streaked across the void, tearing through disoriented Draxine vessels. The bridge shook with recoil, the air filling with the sharp tang of heated alloy. Every impact on the display drew growls of satisfaction from men who had been holding their fury in silence. Multiple kills confirmed, Derek reported, his earlier uncertainty now replaced by grim energy. Their fleet is stumbling, Commander. They can't hold formation. Vosk glanced up, sweat trickling along his temple. Their system's fighting me, but the centralized architecture is collapsing under the load. They're choking on their own discipline. Halvex gave a curt nod. Good. Let the galaxy watch them choke. The chaos lasted minutes, but in those minutes, the blockade fractured. Thrin's signals burst across open channels, voices crying out with desperate hope as the strangling cord around their world loosened. Yet Halvex did not allow celebration. His voice cut through the rising chatter, sharp and grounded. This is not victory. This is the opening wound. Vathar will bring the knife now, and when he does, we'll meet him. The men quieted, their expressions hardening. They knew the Admiral's words were truth. The enemy had been shaken, but not broken. And somewhere beyond the Thrin skies, Admiral Vathar was already preparing the next blow, one that would test whether humanity's memory of a debt could stand against the full fury of an empire. Commander, their fleet is regrouping faster than expected, Vosk warned. His tone clipped as he studied the collapsing icons on the laser plasma display. The bridge was heavy with the aftermath of the last engagement. Men still tasting copper on their tongues from biting down through stress, still hearing the phantom echo of colliding warships reverberating in their minds. The brief fracture in Draxine control had given the Thrin a gasp of relief, but already the enemy was clawing back into formation, adjusting, correcting. Halvex walked forward, his boots striking the deck with deliberate weight. Then we use what they cannot correct, he said, low enough to make every officer lean in closer. His eyes, hard and unblinking, locked on Vosk. You told me their doctrine rests on centralized navigation. That flaws the wound. Drive the blade into it. Vosk exhaled slowly, his hands already moving across the console as though they had been waiting for that order. Streams of alien code and human counterscripts flooded the screens, symbols cascading like a storm. The air grew hotter from the processors, carrying the dry scent of overheated plastics, the faint tick of cooling systems struggling to keep pace. Sweat rolled down his temples, smearing across the rim of his headset. I can feed them false gravities, phantom currents, shadows of stars that don't exist. Their ships will obey because their system was built to trust efficiency over skepticism. Derek shifted uneasily, watching the display with wide eyes. If this fails, we'll have revealed our entire hand. They'll adapt and crush us, Halvex's response was quiet, almost intimate in its severity. Then it cannot fail. The crew worked in silence, each man focused with a kind of desperate clarity. The only sounds were the rapid tapping of keys, the rising pitch of scanners cycling, the dry rasp of men swallowing against the dryness in their throats. The heads-up displays flared brighter, bathing their faces in sharp blue light that carved every worry line into deep relief. Injection ready, Vosk murmured. Deploying now. The bridge seemed to hold its breath as streams of corrupted data lanced into the Draxine network. On the outer screens, enemy formations shifted, first subtly, then with violent unpredictability. A destroyer veered off course, slamming into the edge of its own cruiser escort. Another ship pitched wildly, its thrusters firing against phantom gravity wells. Flames erupted across the black sky as hulls tore, spilling debris into drifting clouds. The crew's eyes widened, disbelief etching across their faces. Darek whispered hoarsely, "They're killing each other." "Not killing," Vosk corrected. voice steadier now, the tremor of adrenaline sharpening him. Obeying the lies I fed them. The bridge erupted into shouts as more icons blinked red. Enemy vessels collided or spiraled. Out of formation, the once tight blockade collapsed into scattered pockets of chaos, a carefully woven net shredded into tangled threads. Halvik didn't smile. He leaned closer to the main display, studying every shift, every flicker. Do not think of this as victory, he told them. Think of it as a door opening. Our enemy has lost shape. Now we make certain they cannot find it again. He turned sharply to Darek. Target the crippled escorts. Remove their teeth before they recover. Rail batteries thundered through the Vanguard's hull. The sound reverberated like a storm in a cavern, rattling teeth and filling the men's bones with vibration. They tasted the sting of ionized air as power flooded through the conduits. Moments later, streaks of kinetic fire tore across the void, slamming into Draxine's ships that had strayed too far from protective formations. Explosions blossomed, lighting the darkness with burning wreckage. The bridge filled with the smell of overheated components and the faint tang of coolant pushed to its limits. Crewmen leaned forward into their stations, some gripping the edges so tightly their knuckles shone white. Every impact on the display drove home the reality. The hegemon's strength was unraveling, not by brute force, but by the manipulation of its own arrogance. Suddenly, a warning klaxon pierced the air. "Incoming!" shouted a sensor officer. "Heavy signatures, multiple ships reorienting directly toward us. They're abandoning the Thrin surface bombardments and converging on our position." Halvek straightened. The moment had come, as he had predicted. "So Vathar brings the hammer." "Let him swing. We've already cut the handle." The first salvo struck, slamming against the Vanguard's shields with a force that shook every man against his restraints. Sparks rained from overhead panels, the taste of burnt insulation coating their tongues. Men coughed, waved smoke from their eyes, then bent immediately back to their boards. "Shields holding at 60%, came the report. Halvek gripped the railing, steadying himself. His voice carried steady, unwavering. "Stay focused. Remember why we are here?" Another impact rocked the ship, sending a rumble through the deck that rattled in their bones. Darek's voice rose over the noise. "Commander, if they keep pressing, they'll overwhelm us." Halvek turned, his stare cutting like steel. "If we stand here and absorb their fire, we die. If we break them now, we live, and so do the Thrin. Vosk, expand the infection. Feed every channel until their fleet collapses in confusion." The cyber warfare officer's fingers flew, his face drawn tight with strain. "I can force their targeting to loop. Their cannons will track shadows instead of us." On the display, enemy fire scattered, ships firing at phantom echoes projected across their own formations. Explosions burst as their shots tore into their allies. A collective gasp swept the human crew as they realized the full scale of the manipulation. Vosk sagged against his console, breathing hard. "They'll know soon." "This won't last forever." Halvek's reply was as sharp as a blade. "It only needs to last long enough." The bridge swayed with another barrage, lights flickering, panels crackling with strained circuitry. Men's eyes watered from smoke drifting in thin tendrils. But for every blow they took, the Draxine absorbed 10 from their own betrayal. Finally, the sensor officer raised his head, disbelief widening his eyes. "They're retreating. The blockade is pulling back. Sir, we've broken them." For a heartbeat, the bridge was silent, the men frozen in the shock of hearing what none had thought possible. Then the air erupted with the sound of ragged cheers, fists pounding consoles, voices raw with release. Halvek didn't join them. He raised his hand, and the noise fell instantly. His gaze swept the room, steady and grave. "Mark this moment in your memory," he said. "For them, it will be humiliation. For us, it is the reminder that war is not decided by numbers. It is decided by where you choose to place the knife." The words landed with weight that pressed into every man's chest, leaving them breathless, their hearts hammering. They knew this was not the end. It was the deep cut before the killing stroke. Outside, the Thrin skies cleared for the first time in months, the blockade fracturing into retreat. But somewhere in the shadows of the system, Admiral Vathar was still waiting. sharpening his response, determined to crush the anomaly that had turned his empire's order into chaos. "Commander, new transmissions incoming. Forced channels," Vosk announced, his voice strained as he pulled the signals across the laser plasma display. The bridge fell into a hush as the feed stabilized. Rows of Thrin captives filled the screen, bound and forced to their knees under the glare of floodlights. Draxine soldiers stood behind them, rifles raised. The crew stiffened. Men clenched fists against consoles, teeth grinding. The air grew heavy with the musk of sweat, the sharpness of overheated machinery pressing against lungs already tight from dread. The images burned deeper than any starship impact. The Draxine commander's guttural tone filled the speakers. "You celebrate small victories. For each of your strikes, we take 10. For every convoy you destroy, 100 of these insects die." Watch the volley erupted. Gunfire cracked, crisp and merciless, echoing through the speakers as bodies toppled like broken reeds. Blood pooled across the ground, dark and glistening under the lights. A murmur of rage ran through the crew. Darek's chair screeched as he shot to his feet, voice breaking with fury. "Animals! They're slaughtering them because of us!" Halvek's face hardened into stone. He did not flinch. His voice was low but carried the weight of an oath. "Not because of us, because cruelty is their doctrine. We are simply the first to resist." The silence afterward was jagged, filled with the sting of helplessness. Men shifted, their movements sharp and restless, the recycled air scratching their throats like dry sand. Halvek's eyes remained on the feed until the screen went black, the captive's cries cut short by the void. Only then did he speak again, his words deliberate. "Archive every second, and then spread it." Vosk's brows knitted. "You want the galaxy to see this?" "Yes," Halvek replied. "The Draxine hide their atrocities behind intimidation. Let every world watch what loyalty to them buys. Let them see the corpses piled on promises of order." The cyber warfare officer nodded, fingers flying as he rerouted the broadcast. Across neutral systems, merchant outposts, and border colonies, the footage radiated outward, carried on human relays. Somewhere beyond, governors and traders leaned forward over their screens and saw for the first time that the hegemon's pride was written in blood. Darek paced, boots ringing sharp against the deck. "And when they see, will anyone actually act, Commander? Or will they turn their eyes away like the Council always does?" His voice cracked with bitterness. Halvek met his gaze, calm but cutting. "Some will turn away. Others will falter. But one world refusing tribute leads to another. Doubt spreads like rot, and rot destroys empires from within." The deck lights flickered as a fresh wave of enemy signatures appeared. The blockade, though fractured, had not broken. Dozens of ships still lingered, their drives flaring brighter as reinforcements poured in from outer orbit. The icons gathered into wedges, spearheaded formations converging toward the human flotilla. "More ships," the sensor officer reported, throat dry. "They're concentrating everything on us now." Vathar's making good on his promise. Halvek's hand rested on the railing, knuckles pressed hard until the skin whitened. "Then we force him to overextend. Pull his fleet where it hurts him most." Vosk leaned toward him. "You want to bait him further?" "Not bait. Expose. We show the galaxy that he would sacrifice thousands of his own soldiers just to silence us. Every overreaction confirms his weakness." Darek swallowed hard. "And what about the Thrin cities? They'll keep firing on the surface." Halvek turned, the steel in his stare silencing the bridge. "We cannot shield every city, but every strike they make strengthens the case against them. Every crater is proof of their rot, and when the galaxy finally sees, they will know why we fight." The bridge held its breath as he spoke, men caught between horror and grim recognition. They felt it in their stomachs, sour and churning, but beneath the nausea grew something else. Resolve, raw and unshakable. Minutes stretched into hours as the Draxine hammer fell again and again. Explosions streaked across them, the Thrin atmosphere, white flares tearing through dark skies. The vibrations from impacts rippled faintly even through orbit, a low thrum that shivered across the hull. The crew tasted the dryness of fear on their tongues, their eyes stinging from the recycled air that grew hotter with each surge of power. And yet, every time the enemy struck, Vosk seeded the evidence outward. Neutral networks filled with images of Thrin cities reduced to rubble, families clawing at debris, children clutching lifeless parents. Outrage rippled across the stars, muted at first, then louder as merchants closed their lanes and border lords suspended tribute. Darek finally broke the heavy quiet, his voice raw. "Commander, I never thought I'd see entire governments bend because of a message. It feels wrong, watching them burn while we turn their agony into strategy." Halvek looked at him, gaze cold but not unfeeling. "War is never clean. Every empire hides its filth. We only pulled back the curtain, and their deaths will not be forgotten. Their names are written into every strike we make." The crew lowered their heads slightly, acknowledging the truth in his words, even as their chests tightened with grief. Then, without warning, alarms shrieked. A colossal energy signature appeared on the display, dwarfing the others. The bridge shuddered as if recoiling instinctively. Vosk's voice cracked as he read the incoming data. "Commander, Judicator Prime, their flagship, it's entered the system." The name spread through the crew like frost across glass, tightening throats, quickening heartbeats. Men shifted in their chairs, the taste of bile rising as the realization settled. This was no longer a battle of fleets. It was the arrival of the hegemon symbol, the blade of its empire drawn against them. Halvek remained motionless, his voice steady as stone. "So Vathar himself comes to prove our deaths. Then we carve our answer into his flagship." The crew straightened, their fear not erased but reshaped into something harder. The smell of scorched circuitry clung to the air, the sting of sweat and heat wrapped around them, the vibration of their own weapons thrumming faintly underfoot. Every sense reminded them that they were alive, that they were men standing on the edge of something history would never forget. Halvek stepped forward, his words clear enough to pierce through every man's doubt. "We came here because of a debt, and before this is over, Vathar will learn what humanity does when it remembers." The bridge answered with silence, not out of fear, but because there was nothing left to say. The moment had been set, the tide of fear had turned, and it was carrying both sides toward a reckoning none could escape. "Contact incoming, largest signature we've ever logged." The sensor officer's words cracked through the bridge, sharp and breathless. Men turned toward the laser plasma display as if drawn by instinct, their throats tightening as the image resolved. The enemy flagship filled the screen, dwarfing every escort, its fractured armor gleaming like jagged obsidian under the glare of the nearby star. Halvek's voice rose, calm yet edged with command. "That is not a ship. That is the Empire's altar, and Vathar means to sacrifice us on it." The crew inhaled sharply. The air smelled of heated insulation and stale sweat, a suffocating reminder of machines pushed to their limits. Their hands slipped slightly against damp consoles, nerves betraying them even as discipline held. Darek whispered almost to himself, "It's bigger than entire stations." "Size is not strategy," Halvek cut back immediately, his words slamming through the weight of fear. "They built a monument. We built tools. Tools always break monuments." The Vanguard shuddered as the Dreadnought's first volley thundered across the void. Energy lances scythed through space, tearing apart two allied escorts before their shields could flare. The sound of impact echoed deep inside the ship's bones, metal ringing as if struck by an iron hammer. The crew's stomachs lurched with the vibration, the taste of copper returning to their mouths as blood vessels strained against the sudden shock. "Shields at half," someone cried. Halvek gripped the railing, steady as stone. "Hold fire until we pull it lower. We bait it where its armor cannot hold." Vosk's hands darted across his console, sweat streaming down his temples. "You mean the atmosphere trap?" "Commander, the risk is catastrophic. One miscalculation and we burn with them." Halvek's reply came without hesitation. "Then don't miscalculate." The crew stiffened. His words struck like cold steel against the nerves of frightened men, binding them into action. The Dreadnought turned its bulk toward the Vanguard, its guns rotating with mechanical certainty. Fire erupted again, white light flooding the bridge, leaving after images that danced across retinas like lightning scars. The shock rattled through every rib and joint, smoke curling from stressed panels, leaving the bitter taste of charred circuitry in the air. Darek staggered against his chair, his voice hoarse. "We can't withstand another barrage," Halvek barked back, louder than the alarms. "Then stop thinking about what we can't. Think about what we must." He pivoted toward the helm. "Take us low. Skim the gravity well. Make them follow. Vosk, seed phantom targets on our flanks to herd them down." The Vanguard plunged toward the Thrin world, its hull groaning under acceleration. The air inside the bridge grew hot, pressing against lungs and skin, sweat dripping into eyes and stinging. Men blinked rapidly, their vision blurring as they forced their focus on the heads-up displays. The dreadnought pursued, its arrogance baited. Vathar's voice thundered across intercepted channels, guttural and furious. "Run, humans! Run into the gravity! Well, I will burn you where the sky itself betrays you." Halvek heard the words but let them pass like wind. His voice, level and sharp, carried across the bridge. "Deploy the rods." Darek froze. "Already. Commander, if we release now, the timing..." Halvek cut him off, eyes like carved stone. "Now, Lieutenant." Across orbit, disguised satellites activated. Long, slender rods of tungsten, hidden for weeks as mining debris, shifted in silence. Their thrusters ignited, guiding them into steep, fiery descents. On the main display, their trajectories glowed red as they streaked toward the dreadnought's projected path. The ship jolted again under enemy fire. Panels raining sparks, acrid smoke filling mouths and lungs until men coughed blood into their fists. But no one looked away from the screen. Every eye locked on the glowing streaks descending toward the flagship. Vosk's voice cracked, uncharacteristically shaken. "If their shields hold, the rods scatter harmlessly." Halvek's jaw tightened, his voice calm against the chaos. Their shields were designed for beams, not mountains falling from the sky. The first rod struck. A flash erupted, tearing through the dreadnought's outer shielding. The blast reverberated across the planet's atmosphere, thunder rolling in the skies below. The bridge crew felt the deck quiver under the shockwave, their stomachs jolting as though gravity itself had shifted. Then came the second and the third. Each impact drove deeper, fractal armor fracturing like brittle glass. Flames poured from ruptured hulls. Explosions blossomed across its length, fire curling outward, blinding bright on the screens. Men shouted, not in celebration, but in sheer disbelief. Their throats raw, their bodies trembling. They clung to the consoles as the dreadnought faltered, its bulk tearing through the upper atmosphere, dragging fire behind it like a falling star. The ship's hull split, pieces shearing away under unbearable stress. Entire sections tore loose, tumbling downward in fiery arcs. Below, the Thrin cities witnessed the sky ignite as their tormentor plummeted, crashing through cloud banks, vanishing into a searing trail that split the night. On the bridge, the taste of salt stung Halvek's tongue as blood from a bitten lip dripped down. He breathed deep, chest burning, and spoke with the certainty of judgment past. Monuments fall. Always the dreadnought struck the planet with a detonation that lit the atmosphere like a second sunrise. The shockwave rippled upward, vibrating the Vanguard's hull, making bones rattle and ears ring. For long moments no one spoke. Only the crackle of static and the hiss of overworked systems filled the air. Then the sensor officer's voice broke through, trembling. "Judicator Prime, destroyed." The words hung, almost impossible to process. The bridge crew slumped against chairs, some sobbing openly, others simply shaking, knuckles white against consoles. Their eyes streamed, stung by smoke and tears alike. They had faced the Empire's altar and broken it. Halvek looked over his men, voice hoarse but unyielding. "Remember this moment. They will call it victory, but for us it is debt repaid in fire." The crew bowed their heads, not in prayer, but in recognition. Every sense burned, the sting of smoke in their lungs, the ringing in their ears, the taste of blood, the sight of flames still flickering on screens. They knew they had survived something history would carve into stone. Outside, the skies of Thrin cleared, no longer chained by the dreadnought's shadow. For the first time, their world looked upward and saw freedom carved from fire and iron. "Report, now!" Halvek's order cracked across the battered bridge, slicing through the haze of smoke and exhaustion that still lingered after the dreadnought's fall. Men jerked upright, blinking away stinging tears, their ears ringing with the echo of that colossal detonation. The laser plasma display flickered, recalibrating as data flowed in, its harsh light reflecting on sweat-drenched faces. "Enemy fleet in disarray," the sensor officer rasped, his throat raw from hours of recycled heat. "Multiple ships retreating erratically. Command signatures fractured. Sir, their network's gone silent." The crew exchanged stunned looks. The Draxine, whose fleets had marched in disciplined unity, now reeled like a beast thrashing from a mortal wound. On the screens, enemy cruisers broke formation, some colliding in blind panic, others fleeing toward jump coordinates without orders. The taste of burnt copper clung to tongues, mingling with the dryness of overtaxed lungs. Halvek's voice stayed low, deliberate. "Do not cheer. Collapse is dangerous. A cornered predator bites hardest." Darek's hands shook as he steadied himself on the railing. "Commander, look at them. They're running. We—" Halvek cut him off with a sharp glance. "We do not chase. We make their collapse louder. Every eye in the galaxy must hear it." The bridge quieted, the men sobered by the weight behind the words. This was not victory for celebration. It was a message still being written. Vosk lifted his head from his console, his voice hoarse but alive with conviction. "Their transmissions are fractured, but I can amplify the chaos. Spread intercepted screams, half-finished orders, retreat signals, broadcasted all raw across neutral channels. Every governor, every merchant, every outpost will see the hegemon's mask shatter." Halvek nodded once. "Do it, and add our footage of Judicator Prime burning. Let the galaxy watch their god fall." The bridge filled with the rapid tapping of controls, the air buzzing faintly as the relays strained to carry the streams outward. Men licked cracked lips, the dryness stinging their throats, while the acrid taste of smoke clung stubbornly to the back of their mouths. The display glowed brighter, as signals leapt system to system, carrying the image of a dreadnought's death into 1,000 halls of power. Moments later, replies began pouring in. Panicked bursts from Draxine governors begging for reinforcements, outraged declarations from neutral lords, even merchants announcing suspended tribute payments. The Empire's image, orderly, inevitable, was unraveling, and the world was watching. Darek stared at the streams, awe and disbelief mingling in his eyes. "They're afraid. Not of us, but of what we've shown them." Halvek answered, his tone ironclad. "Good. Fear will do our work faster than guns." Yet the moment of revelation carried its own sting. Another transmission cut through, this one live. A Draxine commander, his crest dulled and face shadowed, shouted into the feed, "Humans! You think yourselves righteous, but you've condemned every world that ever bent knee to the hegemon. You've brought rebellion to their doors. Blood will drown them, and it will be on your hands." The feed cut abruptly, leaving only static. The crew shifted uneasily, the words clawing into their thoughts. Darek broke the silence. "Is he right? We've stirred the entire order into collapse. Won't others pay the price?" Halvek's gaze settled on him, calm but unyielding. "Every empire collapses on the backs of the oppressed. The difference is, today, the galaxy knows who lit the fire and why. We did not come for conquest. We came for a debt. Let the tyrants fear repayment." The officers lowered their eyes, his words burning into them. They could feel it in their stomachs, sour and twisting, yet it bound them tighter than any oath. Vosk's screen flared again, data cascading. "Commander, their remaining fleets are splintering. Some captains are fleeing without orders. Others are ignoring retreat signals entirely." Vathar's authority is disintegrating. Halvek's response was immediate. "Then let the galaxy see it all. Show them that his throne is nothing but ash and screaming." The bridge shook with a minor impact as one last Draxine frigate fired wildly before being torn apart by crossfire from its own allies. The crew grimaced at the sharp vibration in their bones, the bitter taste of recycled coolant heavy in the air. Yet even in that tremor, they felt the reality. The hegemon's spine had cracked. A murmur of voices rose from the Thrin transmissions, no longer frantic calls for help, but words edged with disbelief. They are leaving. The sky clears. The alien voices carried raw wonder, filling the human crew with a strange heat in their chests. A momentary glimpse of what it meant for an enslaved people to breathe without chains overhead. Halvek allowed the crew to listen in silence, then spoke again. Each word weighted. Mark this day, not as our triumph, as theirs. The men bowed their heads slightly, the smoke stinging their eyes as much as emotion. But even in that fragile moment, Halvek's mind turned cold again. He leaned over the console, his jaw set. This is not finished. Collapse invites scavengers. Others will come to fill the vacuum. The council will demand explanations. Every rival power will watch us differently now. Vosk looked up, his voice soft but certain. And what will they see? Halvek's reply came without pause. They will see that we fight when memory binds us, not when profit tempts us. They will fear it because they cannot calculate it. An empire can predict greed. It cannot predict obligation. The words rang through the bridge like steel striking steel, lodging deep in every man's chest. They tasted salt on their tongues from tears not yet fallen, felt their skin prickle with goose flesh, heard their own hearts pounding with something larger than survival. Outside, the scattered remnants of the hegemon limped away, leaving behind burning wrecks and drifting debris. The Thrin skies, for the first time in generations, opened unguarded. Below, fires still raged in ruined cities, but their smoke carried the scent of endurance, not despair. And on the vanguard, Halvek stood as still as carved stone, his eyes fixed beyond the battlefield. He knew the war was no longer about the Thrin alone. The galaxy itself had begun to tremble. Open every channel, Halvek said. Patch me to the Thrin surface, neutral relays, and any Draxine receiver still awake. This ends today. He stood straight, though every muscle ached. Soot-streaked faces around him. Uniforms were torn, hands scraped raw from emergency repairs. The deck still quivered from distant blasts, and the air tasted dry and hot, as if the ship itself had been left in the sun. Vosk lifted 2 fingers. Live in 3. Halvek faced the pickup. Roran Halvek, Earth Fleet Command. 2 centuries ago, the Thrin warned our world about stones in the dark. We lived because they chose mercy over safety. We came because some debts outlast time. The hegemon answered with blockades, executions, and the promise of extinction. Look at your screens. Their flagship fell. We are not here to seize territory. We are here to end a crime. An alert split the room. Derek bent toward his station, color draining. Emergency launch from Draxine survivors over the southern continent. Multiple descent craft targeting a Thrin reserve. Heat traces heavy. Likely antimatter. Halvek's throat tightened. Time to impact. 8 minutes, Darek said. Minimal escort. They expect confusion. Bring weapons to bear, Halvek ordered, then shook his head. Worst case, fragments still fall. Interception? Darek swallowed. Shuttles could nudge them off course. Volunteer crews die, Vosk warned. Halvek nodded once. Find men willing to trade their lives for thousands. I will speak to them. 4 pilots stepped forward without speeches. As the lift doors shut, Halvek opened their channel. You are not being ordered. You are being trusted. Deflect those craft away from the reserve. If you can, eject. If you cannot, make the arc clean. Shuttles streaked from the bays, white columns burning against black. Trails carved bright marks into the upper air. Enemy descent pods swelled on the scopes, blunt shapes wrapped in fire. Halvek kept his voice steady. Clip stabilizers. Spoil guidance. Do not break your wings unless you must. The first shuttle grazed a pod and peeled away smoking. The target rolled and tumbled toward open sea. The bridge erupted in rough cheers that died as quickly as they rose. The second clipped another and spun end over end. 2 chutes blossomed. 1 pilot drifted free. The other fell through flame. Halvek steadied his breathing. 2 more. The third danced through heat and ash and knocked a pod into barren flats. The fourth drove straight through the final craft and vanished in a white flare. Vosk exhaled, voice thin. All diverted. Ground loss minimal. Darek bowed his head. We will read their names tonight. We will, Halvek said, grief scraping his throat. He turned back to the pickup. You watched men choose strangers over their own beating hearts. That is our answer to terror across the system, messages poured in. Governors opened audits of tribute. Merchants halted shipments to Draxine depots. A Draxine captain, crest lowered, took the link and spoke with a raw frankness that stilled the bridge. We were told humans covet. Today I watch them refuse rewards and bury their dead with honor. My ship will not fire again, Vosk looked over. It's breaking. The story we needed believed is now the story they tell. Then we seal it, Halvek said. Bring me the council. Senior delegates appeared, careful eyes measuring everything. Halvek did not wait for ceremony. You wanted quiet ports while a world starved. Record this. Earth acted under the debt protocol. We seek no rule. We will sign a defense pact here, land relief, and withdraw beyond the rim. A long pause followed. The lead envoy spoke at last. Thrin's sovereignty recognized. Observers dispatched. Earth reclassified. File your labels, Halvek said, firm but not hostile. End the killings. The feed shifted. Thrin elders filled the screen, faces lined, eyes wet with relief that looked like rain after drought. Their leader pressed scaled palms together and bowed. We warned your world when ours was unknown. You remembered we carried it like a family name, Halvek answered. Keep your sky. We will hold the edges until you can relief ships descended. Medics crossed broken streets. Marines lifted stone, while survivors pressed water into their hands. Smoke, sweat, and the earthy scent of wet mortar mixed into a taste that sat heavy, yet clean. Darek worked a light line and murmured the pilots' names under his breath. Vosk stood beside him and finally spoke. We will carry them too. Later, under a dim sky, Halvek and Vosk leaned on the observation rail. Fires flickered across damaged districts. The wind on the deck cooled sweat slicking their skin. We started something larger than a battle, Halvek said. Other powers will study today and write new doctrines, Vosk replied. They can measure our ships, Halvek said. They cannot measure why we move. Was it worth the men we lost? They chose the ledger we live by, Halvek said. I will read it each year. He keyed a final message, carried on tight beam to every relay that had echoed their story. Debt repaid. Withdrawal initiated. Mutual defense accord confirmed. Earth requests nothing. The fleet formed and turned for the dark. On the ground, survivors watched the lights shrink, not as desertion, but as proof that someone had stood between them and the blade, then stepped aside. Darek joined Halvek at the rail. He kept his eyes on the thinning glow. Commander, how do we explain this to children who ask why we went so far? Tell them a small nation across the stars once saved a crowded blue world, Halvek said. The people from that world remembered. When the debt came due, they paid in full, signal traffic faded, crews unstrapped and finally slept. And somewhere in halls where tyrants whisper, a new fear took root, the fear of a species that weighs memory above profit and moves when the ledger calls. The galaxy learned debts remembered can redraw maps without conquest forever. If this story gave you chills, hit that subscribe button for more thrilling HFY tales right here on Stellar HFY. Now we want to hear from you. If humanity carried a debt across centuries, like Halvek did for the Thrin, which forgotten alliance would you honor, even if it meant standing against an empire? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one. Thanks for watching Stellar HFY, where memory, strategy, and humanity's edge turn the galaxy upside down. See you in the next story.